The hospital room was silent. Machines beeped steadily beside the bed where the Texas female police officer's daughter lay, completely unresponsive. Doctors had tried everything, but nothing worked. Just when hope seemed gone, a voice came from behind the bars of the prison block. A prisoner leaned forward and said words no one expected. "I can wake her." At first, everyone thought it was a cruel joke, but what happened next left even the doctors speechless. Stay with me until the end, because this story will leave you stunned. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. Officer Maria Santos had seen plenty of darkness in her 15 years patrolling the streets of Dallas. Drug busts, domestic violence calls, gang shootouts in the middle of the night. But nothing had prepared her for the phone call that shattered her world at 3 in the morning. "Your daughter has been in an accident. You need to get to the hospital immediately." The words echoed in her mind as she raced through empty streets, red lights blurring past her cruiser. 16-year-old Elena Santos had been driving home from her part-time job at the local diner when a drunk driver ran a red light. The impact was devastating. Elena's car flipped 3 times before coming to rest against a concrete barrier. By the time paramedics arrived, she was barely clinging to life. Brain trauma, internal bleeding, multiple fractures. The doctors worked for hours just to stabilize her. Now, 2 weeks later, Elena remained in a deep coma. The machines kept her alive, but her mind seemed lost somewhere no one could reach. Maria sat beside her daughter's bed day and night, holding her hand, talking to her, playing her favorite music. But Elena's eyes stayed closed, her face peaceful yet distant. Dr. Rebecca Chen had exhausted every option in her medical arsenal. The neurologist had seen cases like this before, but Elena's brain scans showed something unusual. The trauma had caused swelling in areas that controlled consciousness, but the pattern was unlike anything she'd encountered. Experimental treatments, new medications, even consultations with specialists from Houston and Austin had yielded nothing. Elena's condition remained unchanged. Maria refused to give up hope. She took leave from the police force, spending every waking moment at her daughter's bedside. Friends from the department brought flowers and cards. Fellow officers organized fundraisers for medical expenses. The community rallied around one of their own, but as days turned into weeks, even the most optimistic visitors began speaking in hushed tones about preparing for the worst. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected place imaginable. Dallas County Jail sat just 12 miles from the hospital, housing over 3,000 inmates awaiting trial or serving short sentences. Among them was Marcus Thompson, a 42-duty theft. Thompson had a reputation among the guards as year-old man serving 6 months for pet quiet, respectful, someone who kept to himself and caused no trouble. What the guards didn't know was Thompson's unusual gift. Since childhood, he'd experienced vivid dreams that sometimes revealed things about people around him. Not fortune-telling or supernatural nonsense, but genuine insights that seemed to come from somewhere beyond normal understanding. He'd learned early to keep this ability quiet. People either dismissed him as crazy or became uncomfortable around him. But something about Elena's story, which had been featured on the local news, stirred something deep within Thompson. Night after night in his cell, he dreamed about a young girl trapped in darkness, calling out for someone to guide her home. The dreams were so vivid he could see her face clearly, could hear her voice echoing as if from a great distance. Thompson had tried to ignore the dreams at first. What could a convicted thief possibly do for a police officer's daughter? The irony wasn't lost on him, but the visions grew stronger, more urgent. In them, he saw Elena standing at the edge of a vast chasm, afraid to cross, unable to find her way back to the light. And somehow, inexplicably, he knew exactly what she needed to hear. The opportunity came when Officer Janet Rodriguez arrived for her weekly visit to check on inmates with mental health concerns. Rodriguez had heard about Elena's case through the department grapevine and was deeply affected by Maria's struggle. As she made her rounds, Thompson called out to her softly, "Officer Rodriguez, I need to tell you something important. It's about Elena Santos." Rodriguez stopped, surprised. Inmates rarely brought up specific cases, especially those involving officers. "What about her?" she asked cautiously. Thompson chose his words carefully. "I know this sounds impossible, but I've been having dreams about her. She's lost, trapped somewhere between sleeping and waking. I can see her clearly, and I believe I know how to help her wake up." Rodriguez stared at him in disbelief. "Thompson, that's not something you should joke about." "I'm not joking," he replied quietly. "I know how this sounds. I know what I am and where I am. But this girl is calling out for help, and for some reason, I'm the one who can hear her. She needs someone to show her the way back." Rodriguez was torn. Everything about the situation seemed absurd. A prisoner claiming he could help wake a comatose teenager? It sounded like the plot of a bad movie. But there was something in Thompson's voice, a sincerity and urgency that made her pause. She'd been a corrections officer for 8 years and had developed good instincts about people. Thompson wasn't trying to manipulate her or gain some advantage. He genuinely believed he could help. "Even if I believed you," Rodriguez said slowly, "how exactly would this work? You can't just walk into a hospital." Thompson had thought about this extensively during his sleepless nights. She needs to hear a specific message, words that will resonate with her spirit and call her back to consciousness. "I can't explain how I know this, but I've seen it in the dreams. The message has to come from someone who truly believes it will work." Rodriguez found herself in an impossible position. Protocol demanded she dismiss Thompson's claims and continue her rounds. But what if there was even the slightest chance he was right? What if this convicted thief somehow held the key to saving Elena's life? "What kind of message?" she asked, surprising herself by engaging further. Thompson closed his eyes, recalling the dreams with perfect clarity. "She needs to know that her mother is waiting for her, not just physically, but emotionally. Elena is afraid that coming back means facing pain, disappointment, guilt about the accident. She's hiding in the darkness because it feels safer than returning to a world where she might hurt again." He opened his eyes and looked directly at Rodriguez. "The message is simple but specific. Someone needs to tell her that her mother forgives her for staying out late that night, that the accident wasn't her fault, and that love is stronger than fear. But it has to be said with complete conviction, with genuine belief that these words have the power to heal." Rodriguez felt a chill run down her spine. The details Thompson mentioned hadn't been reported in the news. How could he know about Elena's guilt over staying late at work? Or about Maria's own guilt over the argument they'd had that morning about curfew? Rodriguez stared at Thompson through the bars, her heart racing. The details he'd mentioned weren't public knowledge. The argument between Maria and Elena that morning, the guilt Elena carried about working late, the specific nature of her fears. These were intimate details that only family members knew. She had to make a decision that could change everything. That evening, Rodriguez found herself standing outside Maria's house. Her patrol car felt heavier than usual as she walked up the driveway. How do you tell a grieving mother that a convicted criminal claims he can wake her daughter? Every logical part of her mind screamed that this was ridiculous, but something deeper urged her forward. Maria opened the door, her eyes red and swollen from weeks of crying. She barely slept anymore, spending her nights at the hospital and her days in a haze of desperate hope and crushing despair. "Janet?" Maria's voice was hoarse. "What are you doing here so late?" Rodriguez took a deep breath. "Maria, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out completely before you respond." They sat in Maria's living room, surrounded by photos of Elena from birth to her 16th birthday. Graduation pictures, soccer trophies, family vacations, all frozen moments of a life now hanging in the balance. Rodriguez explained everything: Thompson's dreams, his knowledge of details he shouldn't know, his conviction that he could help Elena wake up. Maria listened in stunned silence, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been desperate hope. A prisoner, Maria said flatly. You want me to trust my daughter's life to a convicted thief who claims he's having dreams about her. I know how it sounds, Rodriguez replied. But Maria, what if there's even a 1% chance he's right? What if this is the miracle you've been praying for? Maria stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. This is insane, Janet. Dreams don't cure comas. Prisoners don't have magical healing powers. You're asking me to believe in fairy tales while my daughter is dying. But even as she spoke the words, Maria felt something stirring inside her. For weeks, she'd felt completely powerless. The doctors had tried everything science had to offer. Maybe it was time to consider something beyond science. What exactly does he think he can do? Maria asked quietly. Rodriguez pulled out a folded paper from her pocket. He wrote down the message he believes Elena needs to hear. He says it has to be delivered by someone who truly believes it will work. Someone who loves her unconditionally. Maria unfolded the paper with trembling hands. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. As she read the words, tears began streaming down her face. The message addressed Elena's deepest fears, her guilt about the accident, her terror of disappointing her mother. It spoke to wounds that even Maria didn't fully understand her daughter carried. How does he know all this? Maria whispered. I don't know, Rodriguez admitted. But I've been a corrections officer for 8 years. I can usually tell when someone's trying to con me. Thompson isn't asking for anything in return. No reduced sentence, no special privileges. He just wants to help. The next morning, Maria made a phone call that would change everything. Dr. Chen was skeptical, but agreed to meet with Rodriguez to hear the full story. What happened in that conference room defied everything the neurologist had learned in medical school. You're telling me, Dr. Chen said slowly, that an inmate who's never met Elena, never seen her medical files, somehow knows specific details about her psychological state that we've only theorized about. Rodriguez nodded. He described her guilt about staying late at work, her fear of facing reality, even the argument she had with her mother that morning, details that were never made public. Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair. In her 20 years of practice, she'd seen recoveries that couldn't be explained by medical science. Patients who woke up against all odds, often triggered by emotional breakthroughs rather than medical interventions. There's something called the locked-in phenomenon, she explained. Sometimes coma patients are more aware of their surroundings than we realize. They can hear conversations, feel emotions from loved ones, but they're trapped inside their own minds. She paused, choosing her words carefully. If Elena is experiencing something like this, and if this Thompson somehow has insight into her psychological barriers, then theoretically, the right message could trigger a response. Maria felt her pulse quicken. So you think it might work? I think, Dr. Chen said cautiously, that we've exhausted conventional treatments. If there's any possibility that this could help Elena, we have to consider it. The logistics were complicated. Prisoners couldn't simply visit hospital patients. But Thompson had an idea that was both simple and profound. He would write down exactly what needed to be said, in the precise words Elena needed to hear. Maria would deliver the message herself, but with the complete conviction that it would work. The power isn't in me, Thompson explained to Rodriguez during their next meeting. It's in the love between mother and daughter. I'm just the messenger who can see what needs to be said. He spent 3 days crafting the message, writing and rewriting until every word felt perfect. The final version was 2 pages long, addressing Elena's fears one by one, promising her that coming back to consciousness meant returning to love, not judgment. On a Thursday morning, exactly 3 weeks after Elena's accident, Maria sat beside her daughter's bed with Thompson's letter in her hands. Dr. Chen had agreed to be present, along with Rodriguez and 2 nurses. The room felt electric with possibility and terror. Maria began reading the letter aloud, her voice shaking at first, but growing stronger with each word. She spoke directly to Elena's guilt about the accident, assuring her that no one blamed her. She addressed the argument they'd had that morning, apologizing for her harsh words and promising that love was bigger than any disagreement. As Maria read, something remarkable began happening. Elena's vital signs, which had remained steady for weeks, started showing subtle changes. Her heart rate increased slightly. Her brain activity monitor registered small spikes that hadn't been there before. "Keep reading," Dr. Chen whispered, her eyes fixed on the monitors. Maria continued, pouring every ounce of love and faith into the words Thompson had written. She spoke of forgiveness, of hope, of a future waiting for Elena on the other side of fear. The machines began beeping faster, more urgently, and then, just as Maria finished reading the final paragraph, Elena's fingers twitched. The room fell silent except for the sudden acceleration of electronic beeps. Dr. Chen leaned forward, her stethoscope forgotten around her neck as she watched numbers climb on the monitors. Elena's heart rate had jumped from 68 to 85 beats per minute. Her blood pressure showed the first significant change in 3 weeks. "Elena?" Maria's voice cracked as she dropped the letter and grabbed her daughter's hand. "Baby, can you hear me?" The finger movement came again, stronger this time. Elena's index finger curled around her mother's thumb with deliberate pressure. Not a random muscle spasm, but purposeful contact. Rodriguez stood frozen by the door, her radio crackling with routine patrol calls that suddenly seemed insignificant. She watched as 16-year-old Elena Santos began the impossible journey back from the edge of consciousness. Dr. Chen moved quickly to Elena's bedside, checking pupil responses with a small flashlight. "Elena, if you can hear me, squeeze your mother's hand." The squeeze came immediately, firm and unmistakable. "Dear God," one of the nurses whispered, "she's responding." But the real miracle was yet to come. Elena's eyelids began to flutter, rapid movements that suggested her mind was fighting its way through layers of darkness. Maria leaned closer, tears streaming down her face as she whispered words of encouragement. "Come back to me, baby. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Elena's eyes opened suddenly, unfocused at first, but gradually finding her mother's face. Her lips moved soundlessly before she managed to croak out a single word. "Mom." The emotional dam burst. Maria collapsed onto the bed, sobbing as she held her daughter close. Dr. Chen quickly checked Elena's vital signs while calling for additional medical staff. Rodriguez fumbled for her phone, knowing she had to call Thompson immediately. Within hours, Elena's recovery accelerated beyond anything Dr. Chen had witnessed in her career. The teenager was sitting up, speaking in full sentences, asking for water and complaining about the hospital food. Her cognitive functions appeared completely intact, as if she'd simply awakened from a normal sleep. "The brain scans are remarkable," Dr. Chen explained to the growing crowd of family members, officers, and medical staff. "The swelling has reduced dramatically. Her neural pathways are functioning normally. Medically speaking, this shouldn't be possible so quickly." Word of Elena's awakening spread through Dallas County Jail like wildfire. Inmates who'd heard about Thompson's claims gathered around his cell, demanding to know how he'd done it. Guards shook their heads in amazement, unable to explain what they'd witnessed. Thompson himself remained quietly satisfied, but unsurprised. When Rodriguez called to tell him about Elena's recovery, he simply nodded and said, "She found her way back home." The media attention was immediate and overwhelming. Local news stations picked up the story within hours, followed by national networks drawn to the impossible tale of a convicted thief who'd somehow helped save a police officer's daughter. Television crews gathered outside both the hospital and the jail, desperate for interviews and explanations. Maria agreed to speak with reporters, but only to share her gratitude and Elena's remarkable recovery. She refused to speculate about how Thompson had known what to say or whether supernatural forces were involved. "I don't understand everything that happened," she told the cameras, "but I know my daughter is alive and well because someone cared enough to help when we had nowhere else to turn." Dr. Chen found herself fielding calls from medical journals and researchers interested in studying Elena's case. The rapid reversal of her condition challenged fundamental assumptions about coma recovery and consciousness. "We're dealing with something that exists at the intersection of medicine and mystery," she admitted to colleagues. Elena's brain showed signs of severe trauma, yet she recovered as if that trauma never occurred. Elena herself struggled to explain her experience during the 3 weeks of unconsciousness. In interviews with therapists and doctors, she described feeling lost in a dark place where time didn't exist. She remembered hearing voices, especially her mother's, but feeling unable to respond. "It was like being trapped behind glass," Elena explained. "I could see and hear everything, but I couldn't break through. Then someone started talking to me in my dreams, telling me it was safe to come back." She described the voice as belonging to someone she'd never met, but who somehow understood her fears perfectly. The mysterious speaker had addressed her guilt about the accident, her worry about disappointing her mother, and her terror of facing the pain that consciousness might bring. "He told me that my mom was waiting for me, that love was stronger than fear," Elena recalled. "Something about the way he said it made me believe him completely." Thompson's background became the subject of intense scrutiny as reporters dug into his past. They discovered a man who'd lived on society's margins for most of his adult life, struggling with addiction and petty crime, but maintaining a reputation for gentleness and integrity even behind bars. Former cellmates described Thompson as someone who often seemed to know things about people that he shouldn't know. One inmate recalled Thompson warning him about bad news from home hours before a guard delivered word of his father's death. "Marcus had this way of seeing into people," the former cellmate explained. "Not like a con artist reading marks, but genuinely caring about folks and somehow knowing what they needed to hear." Thompson's own explanation remained frustratingly simple. When reporters managed to interview him through the jail's media protocols, he insisted he possessed no special powers or supernatural abilities. "I just listen," he said quietly. "Most people are carrying pain they can't talk about, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in quiet moments. You can hear what they really need." The warden, initially skeptical of the media attention surrounding one of his inmates, began reconsidering Thompson's case. The man's record showed no violent offenses, and his behavior during incarceration had been exemplary. "Thompson's never caused trouble," Warden James Mitchell explained to reporters. "He helps other inmates, participates in educational programs, and maintains a positive attitude despite his circumstances." Behind the scenes, discussions began about early release possibilities and rehabilitation programs. Thompson's actions had demonstrated a capacity for good that transcended his criminal record. Elena's recovery continued to astound medical professionals. Within a week, she was walking normally and showing no signs of cognitive impairment. Physical therapy sessions revealed that her motor functions had remained largely intact, despite weeks of immobility. "In textbook cases of severe brain trauma," Dr. Chen explained, "patients typically require months of rehabilitation to regain basic functions. Elena's recovery timeline is unprecedented." The broader implications of Elena's case began attracting attention from researchers studying consciousness, coma recovery, and the role of emotional connections in healing. Several universities expressed interest in funding long-term studies of similar cases. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a neuropsychologist from the University of Texas, traveled to Dallas to interview Elena and review her medical files. Her preliminary findings suggested that emotional trauma might play a larger role in coma maintenance than previously understood. Elena's case suggests that some patients might remain unconscious not due to physical limitations, but because of psychological barriers, Dr. Martinez theorized. If we can identify and address these barriers, we might unlock new approaches to treatment. The relationship between Maria and Thompson became a focal point of public fascination. A police officer whose daughter was saved by a convicted criminal created a compelling narrative that challenged assumptions about good and evil. Maria surprised everyone by requesting to meet Thompson face to face. Prison regulations required extensive approval processes, but the warden ultimately agreed to arrange a supervised meeting in the jail's conference room. The encounter was emotional and profound. Maria sat across from the man who'd somehow reached her daughter when medical science couldn't. Thompson appeared nervous but genuine as he explained his dreams and his certainty that Elena needed specific words to find her way back to consciousness. "I don't know why I was chosen to help," Thompson admitted. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to be lost and need someone to show you the way home." Maria thanked him repeatedly, her voice breaking with emotion. She'd brought photos of Elena's recovery, wanting Thompson to see the results of his inexplicable gift. "You gave me my daughter back," she said simply. "I'll never be able to repay that debt." Thompson shook his head gently. "No debt exists between us. Helping Elena helped heal something in me too. Sometimes the best thing you can do is exactly what you're supposed to do, even when you don't understand why." The meeting lasted 2 hours, during which Thompson shared more details about his dreams and his lifelong experiences with what he called deep listening. Maria found herself believing completely in his sincerity and his mysterious ability to perceive things others missed. As word of their meeting spread, public opinion began shifting dramatically. Thompson transformed from a nameless criminal into a folk hero, someone whose actions transcended his past mistakes. Petition drives launched calling for his early release, supported by thousands of signatures from people moved by Elena's story. Legal advocates began examining his case, looking for grounds to appeal his sentence or arrange alternative punishment options. Elena herself became Thompson's most vocal supporter, writing letters to judges and parole boards describing how his intervention had saved her life. Her testimony carried particular weight, given her status as both victim's family member and direct beneficiary of his actions. "Marcus Thompson reached into darkness and pulled me back to light," she wrote in one widely circulated letter. "He deserves a chance to do good in the world instead of sitting in a cell." The legal system moved slower than Elena's recovery, but momentum was building. Thompson's case attracted pro bono attorneys who argued that his extraordinary act of compassion warranted special consideration. Meanwhile, the story continued to ripple outward, reaching people who'd never heard of Dallas County Jail or Officer Maria Santos. Dr. Patricia Williams, a sleep researcher from Johns Hopkins, flew to Texas after reading about Elena's case in a medical journal. She'd spent decades studying the connection between consciousness and emotional states, and Thompson's intervention represented something she'd only theorized about. "What we're seeing here," Dr. Williams explained to a packed auditorium at Dallas General Hospital, "challenges our fundamental understanding of how the mind processes trauma and healing. This prisoner somehow accessed psychological pathways that our most advanced medical techniques couldn't reach." She interviewed Thompson extensively, recording hours of conversations about his dreams and his unexplained ability to understand people's deepest fears. The sessions revealed a man with limited formal education, but profound emotional intelligence. Marcus describes experiencing what he calls shared consciousness, Dr. Williams noted in her preliminary report. He claims to feel other people's pain as if it were his own, particularly when they're trapped or suffering in isolation. Thompson's cellmate, Kevin Rodriguez, confirmed these observations. Man would wake up in the middle of the night, sometimes crying about dreams that weren't his own, reporters. He'd know Kevin explained to things about guys on the block that nobody ever told him. Not gossip or rumors, but deep stuff about their families, their regrets. The phenomenon extended beyond Elena's case. Other inmates began sharing stories of Thompson's uncanny insights. He'd warned a gang member about his younger brother's drug problems weeks before the family called with devastating news. He'd comforted a white-collar criminal struggling with suicidal thoughts by addressing specific childhood traumas the man had never discussed with anyone. "Thompson sees straight into people's souls," said Carlos Martinez, a former cellmate serving time for armed robbery. "Not in a creepy way, but like he genuinely cares about everyone's pain and wants to help carry it." Elena's return to normal life proved remarkably smooth. She resumed classes at Jefferson High School, joined the debate team, and began volunteering at the hospital where she'd spent 3 weeks unconscious. Her experience had changed her perspective on life in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. "I used to worry constantly about stupid things," Elena told her school counselor during a routine check-in. "Now I understand that most of our fears are just shadows. The real danger is staying trapped by them instead of moving toward the light." Her teachers noticed a maturity that hadn't existed before the accident. Elena approached challenges with calm confidence, helped struggling classmates without being asked, and spoke about her future with unusual clarity and purpose. "She's always been a good student," her English teacher, Mrs. Patterson, observed. "But now she writes with depth that seems beyond her years. Her essays about overcoming adversity are genuinely moving." Maria returned to active duty with the Dallas Police Department, but her approach to the job had fundamentally shifted. The officer who'd once focused primarily on arrests and enforcement now emphasized community connection and conflict resolution. "That experience taught me that healing often comes from unexpected places," Maria explained to her partner during a routine patrol. "Sometimes the person who can help you most is someone you'd never think to trust." She began advocating for criminal justice reform within the department, arguing for programs that recognized prisoners' potential for positive contribution rather than simply warehousing them. Her colleagues listened with new respect, knowing her words carried the weight of lived experience. The prison system itself started examining Thompson's case as a model for rehabilitation programs. Warden Mitchell commissioned a study of inmates with similar backgrounds and behavioral patterns, looking for others who might possess untapped potential for community service. Thompson's actions demonstrate that incarceration doesn't have to mean the end of someone's ability to contribute positively to society, Mitchell explained to a legislative committee considering prison reform measures. "We need systems that recognize and nurture these qualities rather than suppressing them." Thompson's influence spread beyond the jail walls through letters he began writing to families dealing with medical crises. Word of his success with Elena led to hundreds of requests for advice from desperate relatives of coma patients, accident victims, and people struggling with various forms of unresponsive conditions. He spent hours each day crafting personalized responses, drawing on his mysterious ability to understand what each situation required. His letters didn't promise miracles, but they offered specific guidance for emotional connection and communication with unconscious or withdrawn loved ones. "Mr. Thompson told us exactly what to say to our son after his motorcycle accident," wrote Janet Morrison from Austin. Within days of following his suggestions, David showed his first signs of improvement. The doctors called it coincidence, but we know better. Medical professionals remained divided about Thompson's methods. Some dismissed his successes as statistical anomalies or placebo effects. Others, particularly those who'd witnessed Elena's recovery firsthand, began incorporating his insights into their treatment approaches. Dr. Chen started asking families more detailed questions about patients' emotional states before accidents or illnesses. She encouraged relatives to address unresolved conflicts and express forgiveness explicitly, even when patients appeared completely unresponsive. "Traditional medicine focuses on fixing what's broken in the body," she explained to colleagues during a case review meeting. "But Thompson's approach suggests we also need to heal what's broken in the spirit." The success rate of her modified treatment protocols showed measurable improvement, though she was careful to credit multiple factors, rather than attributing results solely to emotional intervention. Elena's friendship with Thompson continued through regular correspondence and occasional visits. Their relationship had evolved into something resembling that of a wise uncle and beloved niece, built on mutual respect and shared understanding of life's fragility. 6 months later, Marcus Thompson walked out of Dallas County Jail a free man. The governor had commuted his sentence after reviewing thousands of letters from families he'd helped. Elena stood waiting at the gates with her mother, tears streaming down both their faces. Sometimes miracles don't come from where you expect them. Sometimes they come from the most broken places, through the most unlikely people. Thompson proved that healing isn't about medical degrees or expensive equipment. It's about one human soul reaching out to touch another in their darkest hour.